James Harris was 40 years old, and for the past 9 years, he had been the man his wife insisted he pretend to be. He wore off-the-rack suits from department stores. He drove a Honda Accord with 132,000 miles on it. He told people he was a business consultant, a title vague enough to discourage follow-up questions. Her friends called him unmotivated, and she corrected them only to say he was trying his best, which was somehow worse. What they did not know, what she had taken elaborate care to ensure they would never discover, was that James controlled 7 venture capital funds totaling $2.3 billion in assets under management, that his family name appeared on the founding documents of 3 Fortune 500 companies, and that the consulting work he did from the home office 3 nights a week was actually the oversight of a portfolio that moved markets. The invitation had come that morning. Dinner at the Fairmont, 7 o'clock. His wife Melissa had announced it with the enthusiasm of someone planning her own coronation. Her book club friends would be there. Their husbands would be there. She had spent $3,000 on a dress and kept mentioning it. She had spent the afternoon talking about how she was going to tell everyone about her husband's real job, the one she had invented for him months ago, a position at a mid-tier consulting firm that did not actually exist. She wanted to upgrade the story. She wanted him to finally be impressive. She wanted, he realized, the thing she had wanted all along, a version of James that looked good standing next to her. At dinner, surrounded by candles and the careful performance of wine pairings, she had leaned toward him with a smile that had stopped reaching her eyes somewhere around year 4 of their marriage and said, loud enough for the table to hear, "You know what, James? You're such a failure. You're 40 years old and you've never done anything that matters. I don't know why I even stay." The table had gone quiet in the way tables do when someone has said the thing everyone was thinking. Her friends had looked uncomfortable. Their husbands had looked away. James had set down his fork, taken a drink of water, and said nothing at all. What happened next would take exactly 2 hours to unfold, and when it was finished, Melissa would understand that she had spent a decade married to a man whose patience was not weakness. It was a choice he made every morning, and that choice, once revoked, would reshape everything she believed she owned. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from, and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The morning light had been weak when James left the house that day, filtering through the gauze curtains Melissa had chosen, catching the edge of the credenza he had refinished 10 years earlier, before she stopped noticing his work. He had sat in his office chair with both hands wrapped around a mug of black coffee, the way his grandfather had taught him, a man who had built a shipping empire from nothing and who had died knowing that empire would outlive him. James's father used to say that the measure of a man was not what people saw when he was performing, but what remained when the performance ended. They had met at a benefit gala in Philadelphia. Melissa had been talking about sustainable fashion, a subject she had researched for exactly 4 hours before the event, and James had listened to her with genuine curiosity, because at 28, he had still believed that earnest talking was the same as earnest being. He had been unassuming then, deliberately so. He was the heir to something, yes, but he had wanted to build his own thing, to prove it was not accident, but actual capability that ran through his family line. He had not mentioned the trust funds. He had not mentioned the board seats his family held. He had wanted to see if she could love the version of him that drove a modest car and wore watches that did not announce their cost. She could not, it turned out. She could love the idea of him, the potential of him, the platform he might provide. But she could not love the actual man who was building something real in quiet rooms while she built her personal brand in public ones. The shift had been subtle. First, disappointment. Then, criticism. Then, a kind of public humiliation that had started small. a comment about his career trajectory, a joke about his lack of ambition that she told to her friends while he was in the room. Eventually, she had stopped hiding it. She wanted a husband who looked like success. She wanted the external markers, the visible wealth, the prestigious title, the kind of man other women would envy her for marrying. He had not told her who he actually was, because he had genuinely hoped that telling her would not matter, that she had already chosen him, that the revelation would be unnecessary. He was wrong. After dinner, driving home in the Honda Accord while Melissa sat with her phone in her lap, not speaking, James made a single decision. He pulled into the parking garage of the Harrington Building downtown, used his key card to access the executive level, and walked into the office that bore no nameplate on the door. The space was modern and sparse. A desk, 3 chairs, a wall of monitors showing market feeds in real time. His assistant, though she was technically a chief of staff, had gone home hours ago. James was alone. He opened the secure folder on his desktop. He pulled up the Cabot Industries file. The opportunity had been sitting there for 6 months, waiting for him to decide if the risk was worth the return. $500 million acquisition of a biotech firm that was 3 years away from releasing a cancer immunotherapy that would change treatment protocols across the United States. The board had been waiting for his signal. Passive investment. Hands off. 7% annual return guaranteed if things went sideways. 45% if the trial results came back as predicted. Melissa wanted him to be impressive. Melissa wanted him to sign the big deal. She wanted the husband who mattered, who moved things, who was not just competent, but visibly, undeniably powerful. He opened his encrypted email. He called Marcus Chen, the managing partner at Chen & Associates, the firm that handled his major plays. One phone call. "I'm ready on the Cabot thing," James said. "Send the full package. I want it signed tonight." By 8:45 p.m., James had reviewed 40 pages of legal documentation. By 9:15, he had spoken with the board chair at Cabot Industries and the venture team that had been positioning the deal for months. By 9:45, he had reviewed the due diligence one final time and confirmed the EFTA timeline. At 10 p.m., he executed the wire transfer that moved $500 million from his primary fund into the acquisition vehicle. At 10:03 p.m., his phone buzzed. A news alert from Bloomberg. Harris Family Office closes $500 M biotech acquisition. The article did not mention him by name. It mentioned the fund. It mentioned the strategic positioning. It mentioned that James Harris, managing partner of Harris Capital Ventures, continues the family's legacy of high-impact venture positioning in medical technology. By the time Melissa opened her own phone and saw the notification, she would have approximately 4 minutes of not knowing what it meant before understanding would begin to arrive in pieces. When James pulled into the driveway at 10:20 p.m., Melissa was already standing in the kitchen with her phone in her hand, her face moving through the sequence of human emotions that arrives when the ground beneath you shifts. She had Googled his name. She had found the Bloomberg article. She had found the SEC filings. She had found the photographs of him at investor conferences that she had somehow never seen before, standing beside people whose names she recognized from the news. "What is this?" she asked, and her voice had lost its architecture. It was flat, confused, afraid. "The job I actually do," James said quietly. He set his keys on the counter, the same counter where she had announced his failure less than 3 hours earlier. "The one I've been doing for 16 years. The one that built the house you live in, paid for the dress you wore tonight, funded the life you've been performing. I used to think you needed to know what I was. Now I think maybe I needed to know what you were. We both got our answer. But you drive a Honda, she said. Which was almost funny, the way people reach for the smallest truth when the largest ones are collapsing around them. I drive a Honda because I like driving a Honda. I wear these clothes because they are comfortable. I have never believed that what I own defines what I am. You have believed that about me since the day we met. You have been very disappointed by a man who did not perform the role you had written for him. Congratulations. Now you can be disappointed by one who is actually as successful as you wanted him to be. Turns out, success does not change your disappointment. It just makes it cost more. He moved past her toward the study, the one where he had spent countless nights reviewing documents she did not ask about, solving problems she did not know existed. Behind him, Melissa stood with her phone still in her hand, watching the headline refresh in real time. $500 million. Her husband. His name in the Bloomberg headline. The life she had been performing had become real, and she had arrived at it by accusing him of being what he had never actually been. What happens now? She asked. Now I retain a family law attorney. Now we separate finances, which will be very illuminating for you as you discover that the house is in my name, that your credit cards are extensions of my accounts, that the jewelry, the car, the clothing allowance, all of it terminates on my instruction. Now I go to work building something that actually matters while you figure out what you want to be when you stop performing for other people's judgment. James, I didn't mean, yes you did. You meant every word. You have meant every word for years. The only thing that changed in the last 3 hours is that you now understand who you were humiliating when you said it. He paused at the doorway, looking back at her. You wanted the successful version of me. You wanted the power and the money and the status. You did not want the man. And now that you have gotten exactly what you asked for, you are discovering that it does not comfort you. That is not my failure. That is yours. He closed the door to the study and locked it. Melissa stood alone in the kitchen, the phone still in her trembling hand, watching the headline bloom across her screen in real time. Harris Family Office. $500 million. Her husband's name printed in business journalism in the tone usually reserved for people who mattered. 16 months had passed like water. James stood in the office of the new building in downtown Charlotte, the one with his name on the 17th floor, in letters that were not particularly large because he had never needed them to be. The biotech firm's EFTA trials had come back above projections. The stock price of Cabot Industries had tripled. His 45% return was now calculating into something closer to $700 million. He had not paid attention to the exact number in weeks. That was not what drove him. What drove him was the work itself, the assembling of capital, the identification of people who were actually building things, the patience required to let good investments compound into transformations. Renee, his new partner, a woman he had met at a venture summit, someone who asked good questions and did not need anything from him except his time and his actual thinking, was reviewing pitches for the next fund cycle. She worked 3 days a week from his office and 4 days from her own consulting practice. She did not live with him. They had not discussed marriage. They had discussed what they each actually wanted, which turned out to be something much simpler than what James and Melissa had tried to construct. Melissa was living in a condo in Raleigh now, having accepted the settlement offer that was, by any objective measure, generous, $3 million, which was 40% of what would have been a fair division, but which was more than enough to begin again if she chose to begin rather than perform. Her book club had dissolved when her friends realized that the stories she had told them about her boring husband who had actually been secretly rich made them all feel, retroactively, like they had been part of something false. They had been. That was the cost of building your social position on someone else's humiliation. James did not follow news about her. He had moved on. He had built the next structure. He was standing in a space designed to house the work that mattered to him, surrounded by people who were there because they wanted to build things, not perform them. The morning had come in cool and clear. From his office window, he could see the skyline of the city that his family had shaped across generations. His grandfather had built shipping routes. His father had built investment vehicles. He was building futures, actual futures, the kind where people discovered cures, where capital went to the places it could do the most good, where success meant something other than the size of your car. On his desk sat a photograph his assistant had framed without being asked. James, aged 7, standing beside his grandfather in the shipyard, both of them looking at something off camera. His grandfather's hand was on his shoulder. The photograph was old, and the colors had faded slightly. It had been taken the year before his grandfather died, the year before James had understood that legacy was not what you inherited. It was what you chose to build with what you had been given. He had not chosen to build with Melissa. He had chosen to build alone, and that too was fine. Some men needed company to know who they were. James had never been that man. He had always known, with the clarity that comes from certainty, that he was the sum of his choices, not the reflection of other people's approval. The only failure, he thought, would have been to spend another day performing the diminishment she required. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.